Hi, this is Christopher Bruza, and welcome back to part 2 of the Remington 870 20 gauge. And the question we're asking is this viable for home defense, and does it give you a lower recoil advantage in comparison to the 12 gauge, as well as how do they pattern? Go back and watch part 1 if you want to know more about this shotgun. But one thing I don't think I mentioned in there, this has a rem choke system, and I have the improved cylinder choke in it. And the shotgun we used for comparison is this 870 Police 12 gauge. They're both 18.5-inch barrels, and this has an improved cylinder choke. So I thought it was a fair comparison. I mean, they're essentially counterparts of the same gun. Now, I did not use the same ammunition in both. It's not, what I shoot in the 12 gauge is not available in the 20, and as I mentioned before, the 20 gauge ammo selection is very limited. So I did this comparison based on my guns, these ones you see here, with the ammo that I keep in them. So somebody's gonna say, oh, you could get some super hot 20 gauge Dragon's Breath something or other, and you probably can, but I don't have it, and it's not what my guns are set up for. So the 20 gauge is running a Winchester Super X No. 3 buckshot with 20 pellets. It's an advertised velocity of 1,200 feet per second. And in the 12 gauge, I'm running Federal Premium Flight Control 9 pellet double-aught buck. It's LE13200. That's the Federal part number, grade ammunition, advertised velocity of 1,145 feet per second. So you've got advertised 1,200 and 1,145. So fairly close, certainly within the window of the standard deviation of, say, 10 shots with these. We did run them through the chronograph lab radar system, but I'm sure more people are interested in how the pattern difference. So let's cut to the range. I take 3 shots with each gun, and you'll see the target falls over. I set it back up. It was taken from 15 yards. I drew a line on the ground because it's a 25-yard berm. So you see me standing out in the middle of the range. It was an empty range. You hear people shooting over in some of the pistol bays, but there was nobody on the rifle range, so I wasn't breaking any rules by doing that. So let's go to the range with the 20 gauge and see what happens. Okay, we're 15 yards, No. 3 buck, 20 pellets, and just under 1,100 per second. Taking a center max. 2 more. And let's try that again. Okay, target's back up. Okay, that was interesting. A bit larger pattern than I would have expected at 15 yards. I guess not really. The last shot has one flyer off the silhouette, but everything was on the silhouette. So if you exclude that flyer, it's 15 inches between the 2 farthest shots and just about all the way around. If you include that flyer, it's 17 inches. It'd certainly be devastating for home defense. But this ammo is intended for hunting. It's labeled deer and predator. And when I took it apart, I noticed it did not have a wad. Like you have a flight control wad for the 12 gauge, and this flies down the range with it, and 10 yards, 15 yards down, it separates, probably closer to 7, 8, 9, 10, something in there. This is the wadding in the 20 gauge ammo. It is just some felt patches all kind of stacked together and compressed. And all of the buckshot is in front of this. It has Grex in it to keep the buckshot from deforming, but as soon as this leaves the barrel, there's nothing keeping those pellets together. And the pellets are lead. And one of the things that happens when you fire lead pellets is they get deformed. And they do not fly true, and they spread apart quicker due to variances in the aerodynamic drag between them. Where they're being pushed together running down that barrel, they get little flat spots. So that's given all that, it's a good group. Again, I would use that for self-defense. It seemed to hit very hard. Number 3 buckshot, it's no joke. So let's see how the 12 gauge performs at the range. Gauge, double aught, federal flight control, 15 yards. That is what I would call picture perfect for a shotgun. It patterned a little high. I was holding center of the green dot, but it was very consistently outside to outside 8 inches. So it's impressive. That is great ammo. A lot of the difference is going to come down to the ammo, but this is the ammo I'm running in these guns. It's a real world test. The Federal has the flight control wad, as mentioned, as well as the pellets are copper plated, which helps prevent them from deforming when being shoved down the barrel. So either are viable, but I mean I'm impressed with that performance. Before that, off camera, I ran these through the lab radar to get velocity numbers so we can compare the recoil and muzzle energy. I only took 3 shots with each, and the 20 gauge is advertised at 1,200 feet per second. Now the lab radar calculates it right at the muzzle, so I'm not talking about 10 feet down like an old style chronograph or something. The velocity measured was an average of 1,046 feet per second, so roughly 150 feet per second slower than advertised, which makes kind of sense because it's advertised for hunting. So it's going to be tuned in a longer barrel, and they're going to advertise the velocity from a longer barrel, not an 18.5-inch barrel. So we're a bit off there. However, the 12 gauge was advertised 1,145 feet per second. And it actually chronographed at an average of 1,094 feet per second. So 51 feet per second slower than advertised. That's good. When comparing velocity of factory loaded ammo, it's usually more like the 1200 to 1050 difference we saw with this than only 50 feet per second slower. It was a nice day. It was about, I think it was 61 degrees. Density altitude of about 4,000 feet. I don't remember exactly. But so comparing the two, they're very similar velocities. We've got a difference of roughly 50 feet per second. So they're comparable. You're seeing an extreme spread in the 40 to 50 feet per second range. So for intensive purposes, the velocity is effectively the same between the two. Now, I don't know if you can tell by watching the range video, but there's not a lot of felt recoil difference between these two. These guns are set up almost identical. I mean, this one's got wood furniture, but they both have the Nordic side saddle. I weighed them with the side saddle ammo in them, magazines empty, and there's only a pound difference between the two. The 20 gauge weighs 7 3/8 pounds, and the 12 gauge weighs 8 3/8 pounds. As accurate as I could measure them. I actually used a trigger scale to hang the rifle or shotgun on. So they're fairly similar in velocity, and this gun weighs a pound more, which actually comes out to 13% more the 12 gauge weighs than the 20 gauge. Now when we look at recoil, it's simplifying things greatly. It's largely a function of the mass being shoved out the barrel, how fast it's leaving the barrel, and the weight of the gun. I took the ammo, cut it open, weighed the mass of everything going down the barrel. So that's the pellets, the grecks, the wad. I also weighed the charge weight to get that, because that will come into it slightly. It doesn't have a big effect. So everything going down the barrel, the 20 gauge was 505 grains, and the 12 gauge was 534 grains. That's a difference of almost 6%. That surprised me. I expected a much greater difference, because these are slugs just because they're easier to grab, but I mean, this is much more substantial than the 20 gauge. So both of these guns are throwing roughly pretty close to the same weight down the barrel at roughly the same velocity, but this gun weighs less. Okay, so when we fire a gun, there's an ignition, and the forces are all generated by that expanding gas pushing everything down the barrel, which pushes the gun back into you. And that is a function of the kinetic energy generated of everything leaving the barrel and the weight of the gun. That determines how fast, we're greatly simplifying this, but how fast that gun moves back into your shoulder. So the kinetic energy of the 20 gauge was 1,226 foot-pounds force. The kinetic energy of the 12 gauge was 1,419 foot-pounds force of energy. So there's a bigger difference there, and that's because the velocity difference is squared. So a difference in velocity affects things much more than a difference in weight. It's between the two, The 12 gauge has roughly 16% more kinetic energy. But this gun also weighs a pound more. So when we go through and calculate how fast this gun is moving back into your shoulder, the 20 gauge is moving 10.7 feet per second. The 12 gauge, which has more kinetic energy but it weighs more, is moving 10.4 feet per second. So you've got a difference of 0.3 feet per second, which is roughly 3%. That is interesting. And it's similar to what I experience when I shoot these guns. Now, typically people compare free recoil energy. And what that is calculating is you take this gun just floating off in space, fire it, how much energy is actually going back? Because the velocity is one thing, but that's just one part of what you're feeling. You are also feeling that mass of the gun moving at a specific speed. So a lighter gun moving at the same speed as a heavier gun, the heavier gun is going to impact your shoulder more, given that they're moving at the same speed. However, as we saw, the heavier gun, similar velocities and stuff, doesn't actually move as fast as a lighter gun. So crunching those numbers, it turns out, and free recoil energy, when you see recoil tables on the internet, that's generally what they're comparing. So the 20 gauge is 13 foot-pounds of force coming back into your shoulder. The 12 gauge is 14 foot-pounds of force coming back into your shoulder. That's only a difference of 6.2%. 13.1 versus 14 is not a large difference. You would be very hard pressed to find somebody who could shoot a gun accurately that's 13.1 foot-pounds force of free recoil and not be able to shoot a gun that's 14.0 foot-pounds of free recoil. 6% difference is minimal, and I don't think that qualifies the 20 gauge to be a gun for kids, women. You might as well get the 12 gauge. There's very little recoil difference in shooting these. This one handles a bit better. It's smaller, but it weighs less. So get a 12 gauge if you are buying something. There's way more product support, way more ammo choices. They're more readily available. But if you already have a 20 gauge, don't go out and buy a 12 gauge. The performance on the target doesn't warrant that, at least the energy output. Now, we have a different pattern, different spread. I mean, maybe if you anticipate shooting 30 yards, go for a 12 gauge with ferro flight control, but shotgun's not the tool for doing that. If somebody broke into my house and I could grab this or a pistol, the 20 gauge, I'm grabbing the 20 gauge all day long. Shotguns are devastating. This is a ton of, dare I say it, stopping power. It's a ridiculous term, but it works here. In a defensive situation in your home, these guns are effectively the same, but as I mentioned in the first video, these are very hard to come by. The ammo is scarce. There is not a big selection. If all things being equal, say you could go out and buy a 870 20 gauge police with federal flight control, it's a toss-up. Just get whatever one's available. But that's not the case. If you're setting out to buy a shotgun for home defense, 12 gauge is what you want, or at least in my opinion. So I really appreciate you watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. And until next time, enjoy.